Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next conversation with Steve Shields, we'll talk about some groups that aren't really a denomination. Steve Shields calls them para-church organizations. What does that mean exactly? Check out our conversation. It was interesting to see some of your other groups. I think some of them you wouldn't really call churches.
Right.
One of them I know was Affirmation.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Affirmation is a para-church organization.
Yeah, para-church.
Yeah. It provides a church-oriented fellowship for LGBTQ people who are not often welcome in the standard ward. And most of them are LDS folks in Affirmation. But they're providing a ministry that is, dare I say it, tangential to the LDS Church. And so I consider that an expression.
Would it be like the Genesis group?
Genesis group would have been a very similar kind of a group. Genesis, though, had the full support of the church,
right,
where Affirmation does not.
Okay.
So there's a little difference there.
Okay.
Maybe that's a big difference, actually. And certainly with the LDS Church's policy of a couple of years ago about LGBTQ people and their children being able to be baptized would take them even one step further the other direction, away from seeing Affirmation as
whereas the Genesis you could
where
be
Genesis
baptized.
was right. Yeah, they were right there.
And so just for people who may not know what the Genesis group is, I know we do, but
right.
Can you describe the Genesis group?
I probably don't know very much about it. It was before blacks were allowed to be ordained, and it was a ministry group for black LDS church members, their families and friends, that they could be members of the church, and it was a support. It was supported by the church, mostly here in the Salt Lake area, I think.
Right.
Darius Gray, who is well known in Mormon thought circles, was one of the, as I remember, one of the key people.
He was one of the original counselors,
right,
and he went on to become president later.
Yeah,
he's a great guy.
And that was an important ministry in a time. In the era of civil rights upset in the United States, ultimately then I want to say 78, when full ordination was finally permitted for all, and
the Genesis group still meets.
They still have fellowship. Yeah. Okay,
I was lucky enough just a month or two ago. And I'm a big sports fan. People might not get all excited about this, but I was very excited. Jabari Parker, who plays for the Milwaukee Bucks, he's an LDS. He was there, and I was so excited. Got my picture with Jabari Parker.
That's exciting. Yeah.
And Alex Boyer was there. It was pretty cool. So, they still meet once a month, have a session, and I know I've been there before. And Darius Gray says, it's okay to clap in the chapel, though the roof won't cave in.
Oh, that's a bit outside the box there. Yeah.
But if anybody saw the B1 celebration, it was very similar kinds of music. I'm trying to remember who the other group was. They were at Sunstone.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dear.
Why can't I remember the name?
Yeah. Sunstone 2018, Salt Lake City, look it up.
Yeah, it was a fantastic group.
They're a wonderful vocal group. Yeah.
Really, really, and they were part of the B1 celebration as well.
Okay,
I'll put that in the footnotes there if I can remember the name. But.
So Affirmation's in the book, but Genesis group isn't.
Oh, I wonder why that is.
Well, Genesis group was LDS Church.
Oh, okay.
It's like I don't have the singles wards in the book either. That's really the same kind of a thing, in my perspective of what the Genesis group was trying to do.
Okay.
Affirmation is saying the church isn't giving us any ministry, so we're going to do it ourselves.
So
and early on, when Affirmation first started, it was even more. Probably it was never really antagonistic. But it was, we're going to have to do this on our own.
Okay.
And there was a real...
So they're more independent from the church.
Much more independent distinction then. I think they've kind of shifted a little closer to mainstream in the last decade or so.
Okay. That brings up another question. So, because I think your fourth edition was published in 1990.
Yeah.
And then with your new fifth edition, which is that going to be coming out next year?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Cofford Books timeline is on it.
I'll talk to Brian about that. So ordained women, would that be in your new book? And the Snufferites, I want to talk about them.
I don't have ordained women in the book. I suppose I probably could have. It came along.
Isn't that like Affirmation?
Well, I guess it is, actually. So maybe they should be.
You're going to have to put it in. You got time to put that in?
No. That's the problem. They didn't make the cutoff. There's always going to be those kinds of things that, for whatever reason, it just wasn't hitting me at the right thought pattern. So, hey, you're probably right. They probably should be mentioned.
Okay.
They probably should be in the book.
How about Denver Snuffers?
And Denver Snuffers Group definitely is.
It's in the
and we don't call them Snufferites. We call them the Remnant Movement or the Doctrine of Christ Movement. Because remember, Brother Snuffer has not said, I am the only prophet.
Right.
You must follow me. Even though he has issued revelations. And they were working on kind of a revised version of the Four Standard Works. And I don't know just where they are in that whole timeline. They were supposed to, they'd published actually some pro forma books, and were supposed to be presenting them to a conference that they were having. And I frankly just, they came in at the tail end of the manuscript, and I had to have a cutoff date and say, okay, after this, I've got to say it's done, because the book is never done. Just in the last month, I've found out about 4 new things that should have been in the book 100 years ago.
100 years?
I mean, they date from 100 years back.
Oh, really?
That I'd never ever come across, and somebody dug them up.
Oh, can you share?
Said, can't think of the guy's name. I've stuck it in a file, saying, well, that's going to have to be 6th edition. For Pete's sake. He was an RLDS Aaronic priest in, I think it was in Detroit area. Oh, my gosh, the names escaped me. In the 1960s, he started a ministry in the church fellowship hall for young men who were struggling with addiction. And it morphed into almost a cult where they referred to him as Sir. And the church said, this has gone too far off. And they silenced this fellow, took away his priesthood. They didn't kick him out of the church because Community of Christ is always hesitant to do that. And if it's a priesthood member, they simply can take their priesthood away and leave it at that. And they were into, it became a doomsday thing. Oh. They were storing food and all these things, and there's still some of them around apparently in Colorado. But that's, at this point, that's all I know about them. But that was just a couple of weeks ago. Wow. That somebody emailed me and said, hey, do you know about...
Well, and I was going to ask you, have you gotten some emails, because I know, where people say, hey, I'm a member of this group or whatever, and here's more information? Unsolicited?
Occasionally I do, not often. In fact, the write-up I have in the 4th edition about Bickerton's Church of Jesus Christ, I knew back in the 90s when I was in Los Angeles area, I knew quite a few of those folks. And one of their congregations asked my permission to photocopy it and use it as a tract to explain the church to people. Oh, nice. So that says to me that I got it right, I guess. Yeah. If they felt it described their church that well, that they just wanted to... And I gave them permission to do that. I said, you're welcome to do that if it's helpful. And I often, when I can, I've sent what I've written up to key leaders in different places. Say, tell me if I've got it right. And just at Sunstone, I finally got to meet Benjamin Schaefer from the Christ Church, the Righteous Branch.
Is that the polygamous group in southern Utah?
Yes, yeah, out near Modena.
Was that
he did a session on divergent paths of temple ordinances at Sunstone.
That's not the one I was thinking of.
And he said,
was his name Patrick? Daniel Patrick or something?
No, I don't know. Benjamin Schaefer is the one I'm talking about. And so I met him. He says, I hope you don't mind me using your... I said, no, I'm honored that you felt Divergent Paths was a great way to title your paper. And I said, as a matter of fact, I need to be updated because they quit corresponding for years. They just fell off the radar and wouldn't answer emails, nothing. And he said, I'd be very happy to help. I said, well, I'm going to send you what I've written up. Take a look at it, add some updated information, whatever. And so he and I polished a new manuscript for that section, and he's now sent it to their first presidency to, just to say, are we, has Benjamin, got it right, but has Steve also got it right, and are we representing the church appropriately? Now, I will edit out what I consider to be apologetics when they send me back here's what we'd like to say. And that would be a tract for your church to produce. I want to be more... So they call Rulon Allred a martyr. Well, we can get into all the arguments about what constitutes a martyr and what doesn't. The church believes Rulon Allred to be a martyr. Rather than just a statement of fact.
Right.
I feel that's more objective from my perspective. Now, Rulon Allred, was killed in his office. If they want to see him as a martyr, that's fine. But I don't think I can state as a fact that Rulon Allred was a martyr. Mm-hmm. I can't state that as fact. Mm-hmm. So, but those are minor things, those are not really gross apologetics, and I say, a reported vision, so and so received a revelation from God, and I'd rather say so and so proclaimed he'd had a revelation from God. Thus, I do that in the Community of Christ section.
You've cleaned it up.
Well,
I've
tried to, I'm trying to write for a broad audience. If I were writing just for a Community of Christ audience, I would say something different. Mm-hmm. The audience is important, but in the church history area, any history areas, you have your own perspectives, you have your own biases. I try to be sensitive to that, and I try to be objective, even though there's no such thing. That's just, that's been my goal. Right. And but I do. There's a Facebook page that some friends set up called what's it called? LDS Groups or something. No, is it Facebook or is it a Yahoo group? Anyway, used to have lots of correspondence going on there with. Especially as I was working on the manuscript for the 5th edition, we were putting out, anybody have any more information here and there and there, and it's I don't know, it's not a moneymaker, but I didn't do it for money. I did it because I'm interested in it, and passionate about tracking down as much as I can track down, and it's and I have a few that are non-U.S. Canada based. I'm sure there's more, but language, I have several in South America. Well, I say several, 5 or 6 maybe. A couple in Europe, ran into one guy in Korea years ago who was LDS but had his own revelations and produced his own book of scripture and was invited out of the LDS Church over it. But everything's in Korean, so and it's all handwritten manuscripts, and he gave them to me. So I have those in the archives in Independence. But, I've translated what I can, and it just, the pursuit of it is fascinating. It's fascinating to see how many different takes on what originally seems to be fairly simple. Mm-hmm. And, it's developed into all these different branches of this great big giant tree. Mm-hmm. And I welcome other scholars who are doing papers and going into depth and maybe pointing out where I just didn't have it right. That's okay too. It takes all of us to do it, not just one. And sometimes it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's like, I'll be glad when this book is in print and I don't have to think about this for a little while. Because there are some other things that I'm interested in doing.
Yeah.
Maybe have time. So, yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Steve Shields. In our next conversation, we'll talk about some of the notorious Mormon groups.
It's really hard to deal with some of those that are just so grossly offensive in what they do. And a lot of people, especially Bob Crossfield's folks, would rather I not talk about the Laffertys. Mm-hmm. But I say, well, I can't not because they exist.
If you'd like a transcript of this conversation, we'll have it out shortly. I'd also like to thank you for those of you who are subscribing on patreon.com. Please tell your friends. It's really helpful and will help support future documentaries and podcasts such as this. Also, make sure that you subscribe on our Facebook page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. You can get our Twitter updates at Gospel Tangents. Also, make sure that if you'd like a written copy, go to our Amazon page. You can search for that. I've got a link here, but just do a search for Gospel Tangents Interview, and you should be able to find it there. You can also purchase a transcript of this at gospeltangents.com/shop. All of those proceeds will go to me and not to Amazon, so I really encourage you to do that. Make sure that you subscribe on our Apple Podcast page. I've got a link here, but you can just do a search for Gospel Tangents there. If you'd like to get a transcript, click here. To subscribe here on YouTube, go ahead and click here. And over here, you'll see some of our other videos. Thanks for listening, and we appreciate you listening to Gospel Tangents.